Welcome to Polyglot Podcast. I'm Christian from Finland, and today we have Elizabeth Keyton. Elizabeth Keyton from, I don't actually know where you're from.
I'm from USA. I grew up in Georgia and I've actually been outside the US since 2015. So I've been doing a lot of traveling and working.
Yeah, and I actually found you on Instagram. I've been following your Malayalam teaching or learning platform. I don't
Mhm.
even, I'm not even learning Malayalam, but I started just following some interesting channels, and you have some interesting content about Malayalam. And as a language nerd, I think I started following you around a year ago, and now I started my podcast like 2 3 months ago, and I
Mm.
thought that it would be interesting to talk with you about your language background and also how you ended up learning Malayalam. And
Sure.
where do you live now?
Right now I'm in Kerala, India.
Yeah,
I'm
southern
here.
India. Got
Yes, that's right. And I'm just here on maternity leave, but otherwise I'm based in Hanoi, Vietnam. My husband and I are working there.
Oh, okay. Um, we will come to that point where we maybe talk more about that, but let's start from the beginning. So you're from the state of Georgia in the
Yes.
US.
Yes.
Yeah. What's your hometown?
So I grew up in Savannah, Georgia until I was about 9. And then I moved to Northwest Georgia, where basically we're at the border of Tennessee and Alabama in a small town called Fort Oglethorpe. And I was pretty much there in Northwest Georgia until I got my first teaching job in South Korea.
Oh, okay. Before talking about South Korea and moving away from the US, what's the language background of your family? Like, what languages do your maybe siblings, parents, grandparents speak? Like as the native languages, and also what additional languages they speak?
So my biological parents just speak English. We're very much like multi-generational white Americans. But my stepmother actually immigrated from former Yugoslavia to the States in the 1970s, 1980s. So every time I would visit my grandparents, I'd always hear Serbian being spoken in the house. So that was always very interesting to have that kind of influence on my childhood. Unfortunately, my younger brother didn't learn Serbian, and my dad didn't really try to learn Serbian. And that's
Yeah.
actually one of the main reasons why I later became such an avid language learner. So, to kind of push back on what I saw growing up.
Mm. But did you get yourself interested about languages when you heard Serbian?
Well, I heard Serbian and I would try to learn bits and pieces of it, but it was just difficult because one thing we don't realize is just because someone can speak a language, it doesn't mean they can teach it. And because I had such limited interactions with my grandparents growing up, it isn't like now where we could just video call or chat and do
Yeah.
this and that. So I just didn't have enough motivation to stick with it. But when I was in school, we started learning Spanish and I took to it really well. And I studied it in elementary school and then again in high school and college. And I got to use it when I was working retail because in Georgia, we have an influx of migrant workers from Spanish speaking countries. So that's kind of where it started. And then also as a child, I was really interested in Japanese media. So I was playing video games, watching anime, these kinds of things. So that also gave me an interest in Japanese language in addition to the media that I was consuming.
Yeah. But you didn't have any Japanese classes, I assume, so because maybe your school didn't have Japanese classes, or
I remember our school was piloting this distance program. Now, this is back in 2004. So, like, distance programs weren't really a thing, but we had had a Japanese teacher doing remote classes through the school. But unfortunately, I was unable to enroll in the class. But there were some opportunities, but a lot of it was self study through CDs that I would find at bookstores or I remember my uncle married a Japanese woman, and so her parents would try to teach me a little bit. So, there's these little pockets of
mm,
attempts to really try. But I think the thing that was missing from me was like the strongest motivation to learn something, whether there was like some kind of end goal or some kind of goalpost to work toward. And that only came later in life when I started learning specific languages for specific reasons.
Yeah. And you said you studied Spanish in elementary school. On what grade did you start Spanish?
So I first started learning Spanish, I think in third or fourth grade. And that was when in our class, we could choose a Spanish name for ourselves, so that it's like you have a whole other personality when you go
Yeah.
to Spanish class. So I'm not Eliza, I'm Isabel. And like it was just really
Okay.
interesting. And I just have very vivid memories of my Spanish class. And then when I was in high school, my teacher there was the first person who showed me the immersion method, where from the time you walked into the classroom, the teacher would only speak Spanish. And she would just be like, abren los libros, like being very,
Yeah.
animate, and that really helped push me to learn Spanish. And when I was in college and I was working retail at the same time, again, there was that motivation to talk to my customers, to communicate with colleagues, and so that's why I really got interested in maintaining my Spanish.
So you get to a quite good level in Spanish if you spoke to your clients.
Well, yeah, I did. And now I've been trying to get back into it because it was like 10 years since I really spoke Spanish, because I wasn't in an atmosphere where I was needing to use it on a daily basis. So right now I'm between B1 and B2. But as you know, when you're juggling multiple languages, sometimes you have that kind of crosswire effect. So
Yeah.
I mean to say something in Spanish and it comes out in Malayalam, or if I'm trying to speak in Malayalam, something from Spanish will get in the way. One time I remembered I actually conjugated a verb in Spanish, but it was a Malayalam verb. So like it was like, wait a minute. So it's really funny.
Yeah, my wife told about similar things happening to her in her work here in Finland. So her mother tongue is Russian, and we talk in Finnish usually, but we practice before Spanish. So she said a couple of times she started speaking in Spanish to her coworkers and mixing up languages. So after college, did you move to South Korea after college, or?
So basically, I got my 2-year degree. In America, we have an associate's degree, so that's like a 2-year degree before your bachelor's. And my ex at the time was stationed in South Korea with the U.S. Army, and I wanted to go to Korea. So at that point, there was a program called Talk, Teach and Learn in Korea, and it was basically aimed at schools in regional parts of Korea and introducing English language classes with foreign teachers. So it was a part-time gig. So I was like, I want to do that. That sounds interesting. So I signed up for it. And yeah, I went to Korea in 2009. And I was teaching and I realized how much I enjoyed it. And I wanted to make sure that I was learning all the things I would need to know to be a good teacher. So I started studying remotely my bachelor's while teaching in Korea. And then same thing with my master's. I was teaching and traveling. I lived in South Korea, in Texas. I went to South Korea again in 2013. So I was doing a lot of moving and getting a lot of really good experience, and also doing my schooling at the same time.
Yeah. And in what field did you get your bachelor's and master's?
Yeah, so my bachelor's is in English as a second language tuition, so how to teach to ESL learners, EAL learners. And then my master's is in educational administration, so how to work with a student population, how to lead in an educational organization. So basically building on that. I'm very happy that I found early on that I really enjoyed the education sector, and I was really able to help develop my skills so that I can be useful inside and outside the classroom.
Yeah. How long did you stay in South Korea?
So I did a total of 2 years, one school year from 2009 to 2010, and then another school year, 2012, 2013.
Yeah. Did you learn Korean yourself during those 2
Yes.
years?
Yeah, so I would have classes with one of my colleagues. So he was Korean, and so he offered to help me learn Korean. And I would just practice with taxi drivers because they were always really excited, like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And it really helped. But something that I struggled with, and a lot of foreigners will say this, is sometimes you make Vietnamese friends and you agree to do a language exchange, and then you end up spending 80% of the time speaking in English because they
Yeah.
really want to practice their English. So for me, the easiest way to practice was just interacting in daily life, whether it's going shopping, getting a taxi, ordering food. I would say I got to like an A2 B1 level, because you can't really go into deep conversations in these kinds of
Mm.
contexts. But being there for 2 years and being surrounded by the culture really lended to that urgency of, okay, I want to be able to, you know, integrate into this culture and learn from it. So I felt really motivated to learn the language.
And where in South Korea did you live?
So the first time I was in Chuncheon, which is in the northeast, and it's really famous for Nami Islands. Like there was an old K-drama apparently that took place there, and they get all 4 seasons. It's beautiful. You have snow, you have autumn leaves, and they're famous for this dish called dakgalbi, which is like a barbecue chicken with sweet potato and rice cakes, and it's fantastic. And the second time I lived there, I was in Dongducheon, which is very close to the North Korean border. Because my ex was in the military,
Mm.
his duty station was very close to there. So to get to Seoul was about 1 hour on the metro.
Yeah. And according to your experience, what was the general level of South Korea's English level?
I think when you're in the city, when you're in Seoul or other big metropolitan areas, the level is quite good. English is such a huge industry, and it's such a big push. I mean, to get into university, you have to pass an English test, and I would say that the understanding is quite good. And then in the rural places where there's maybe not as much access to educational resources or classes, it'll be a bit less. But I did find that Koreans in general do understand a lot of English, but a lot of people that I worked with felt a bit shy to speak
Mm.
because they didn't want to make mistakes in front of foreigners. Whereas when I was working in the Middle East, I found that Arabs in general that I interacted with
Yeah.
didn't mind that they were making mistakes. They were very much wanting to talk, and they weren't thinking about their English levels. They were thinking
Yeah.
about just making the connection, having that
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a very interesting culturally to see that difference when it comes to speaking languages.
Yeah. So in the Middle East, in what point did you live there?
So I finished my master's degree in 2014, and at that time I was teaching Saudi students in Texas. And I was asking them, like, hey, I'm an American, I have a lot of college debt. I know that the Middle East is a good place for working as a teacher and getting a good salary. And they said, man, don't go to Saudi, go to the UAE, try Dubai. So I applied for a job with a government school in the UAE, and I got the position. So I went there in 2015, and I spent 5 years working at an Emirati high school, working with local Emirati girls on improving their English and giving them the skills for professional and business English.
Yeah. How old was it high school or university level or?
High school, so I taught grades 8 through 12.
Yeah. Okay. So after South Korea, 2012 or 2011 you returned to the US, and then after a few years.
2013, I came back to the US, and then I finished my master's degree. I had an internship requirement, so I completed that in Texas. And then, yeah, upon graduation in
Mm.
2014, I started applying for jobs abroad. And in the fall of 2015, that's when I started working in the UAE.
Yeah, in 2015 to until 2020 or
2020,
2019 you lived there.
2020.
Yeah. And in Dubai.
Yeah, actually, my school was in a emirate called Ajman. So if you think of the UAE like a thumb and a finger,
Yeah.
Dubai is like down here,
Hmm.
and then you'll have Sharjah and Ajman. So Ajman's about 40 minutes from Dubai,
Yeah.
and it's a bit quieter and it's a bit more localized. You'll find a lot more like Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi people, Arabs living there, and yeah, so I was working with students there, and after I met my husband, I shifted to Dubai, and I was just commuting to work.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So he lived in Dubai, and then you lived together in Dubai. And
Yeah, my husband's he's a Gulf kid. He grew up in Saudi and then he was in Dubai for work. And so we met while we were both working in the UAE.
yeah. And how was your 5 years in the UAE? Did you?
It was really good. But you know, I thought I'd have to learn Arabic, and then I realized when I got to the UAE, 90% of everyone in the UAE is not from the UAE. It's mostly an expat
Yeah,
population. So everyone's speaking English. And you know, I really liked working with the girls, and it was just really neat because a lot of people working in the UAE don't actually get to meet a lot of Emiratis because again, they're such a small percent of the
mm,
population, and they tend to have like their own groups together. Um, so, but you know, I also learned that there's so many different variations of Arabic. So like, you know, the Arabic that my students speak at school are going to be different from Egyptian Arabic or Lebanese Arabic. And so I learned that there's all these differences in the language. And then of course, when I, you know, met my friends, most of the expat population is from India. And I got to learn about all the different places in India because before
mm.
most Americans were just like, okay, India is the Taj Mahal and butter chicken and Bollywood, right? And then
Yeah,
after moving to, you know, the UAE, my best friend is a Tamil woman, and so she's telling me all about Tamil Nadu and the language and the food and the culture. And her husband is a Malayali, and
yeah,
there's so many Malayalis working in the UAE. Like they call Gulf like Kerala Part Two because there's just so many
yeah,
migrant workers. It's only a 3 hour flight, and I mean historically there was so much trade between the Gulf and Kerala just because they're sharing that trade route. So yeah, like it was just really cool just seeing all these different kinds of people, all these different languages, learning more than I realized I had known before. Because I considered myself like pretty well read, open minded, and then I realized how little I actually knew
yeah,
once I actually, you know, was there seeing everything and meeting everyone.
yeah. So Malayalam is the mother tongue of your husband, or
Yes, that's right.
and did you start learning it already when you lived there?
So I knew about the language already because of my friends, but I hadn't studied it very much. I would just pick up on a few conversational things like, okay, yeah, thanks, you know. But when I met my husband, you know, like I said before, my dad didn't learn my stepmom's language, and that always left a really big impression on me. So after I realized that things between my husband and I were getting serious, I'm like, fine, let's start studying Malayalam. And
Yeah,
that's how this whole thing started because even though there's 40 million speakers of this language, back in 2017, 2018, when I was starting to learn, there was hardly any resources or tutors or anything to really learn the language well.
yeah. Which year was it when you started like seriously?
2017 is
2017.
when yeah, 2017.
Yeah. So how did it go? Because if you didn't have a lot of content, learning content, did you just ask stuff about your husband?
Well, so, you know, when I first started, there was one YouTube channel called Fluent in Malayalam that's still running now. And there was one italki tutor named Yasir. And
Oh,
so like, yeah. And so I reached out to Mr. Yasir and I had a few lessons with him. But then the UAE banned Skype because in 2017, they weren't allowing any VoIP like to work. It wasn't even until the pandemic that you could use Zoom properly and things like that. So, yeah, I found some grammatical like textbooks online. I found an old course book from the 1970s. I would ask my husband stuff, but I'm sure you know that a partner is not always the best person to ask for things in the language if they're not a teacher. Like
yeah.
like small things like in Malayalam there's two L's, there's a front L and there's a retroflex la. And
Allah.
so
Yeah.
he would say like the word for church and the word for lizard. So church is parli and lizard is pali.
Yeah.
And at that time I couldn't understand. I was like, it sounds the same. He's like, it's not, it's pali parli. But he couldn't explain to me what a retroflex L was because
Yeah.
he didn't have the vocabulary for that. So, those early days were definitely a bit stressful, but then once I started reaching out to the community and all these other things, then I was able to get more confidence. Sorry, hold on just a second.
Yeah, no problem.
Let me just make sure you okay, buddy? Are you okay? Oh, you don't want to sleep? Okay. Let me just make sure he doesn't want anything. He had his vaccines yesterday,
Yeah.
and surprised how many vaccines they give these kids. Like he's gone 3 times already for vaccines. So, are you good? Okay. He's just talking at his toys. Yeah. Sorry if the sound is coming through. I know on podcasts you try to be a bit more sounds.
Yeah, I can barely hear.
Okay.
Yeah, something. I heard something, but not that much.
Sorry about that. Just keep this on standby in case he gets upset. So yeah.
Yeah, so you like it was interesting what you said before, like that partners usually aren't that good teachers of their language. Well, in my case, my wife is the best teacher because she's a translator and a language teacher. But
nice.
When she asks something about from me about Finnish language, I'm a terrible advisor sometimes. I'm just like, okay, it's just like this in Finnish. I know much more than the average Finn because I've studied a lot of languages, but still there are a lot of things I don't know why it's like that.
Yeah, that's why I find it frustrating when I pursued a teaching career. My dad is like, oh, those who can't teach. And I'm like, teaching is definitely a skill. And it's definitely like, some people, they don't know my background. So when they come to my page or they see what I do, they just, sometimes think like, oh, she's just, doing Malayalam for attention, or, oh, she's just, blah, blah, blah. And, I have to say, actually, I am a qualified language trainer. I understand how to teach languages. And if you, look at the things we do, it's not just repeat this or here's what this is translated. You have to be able to explain the things. And, it takes a skill to be able to break it down in a way that's comprehensible for everyone.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I think
it's
I think you can actually probably explain better the Malayalam logic and grammar for other people who are learning it as a native language than some of the natives, because
I think I think the biggest thing is that, like some people have pointed out, well, because you've learned it, you know where the pain points are. As an English speaker, you know where things will be confusing, so you can say, hey, this is like this because of this. And a lot of people who follow my page are Malayalam speakers, but they follow it because I explain things and they're like, wow, I didn't know this about my language. Like whenever I explain agglutination, and people are like, what the heck is agglutination? And then I give an example and they're just like, whoa, so it's really fun. It's really fun. And being able to point out examples and explain things is just really cool. And people also get to share their localized way of saying things, because I'm teaching and learning basically book Malayalam, but as we know, language spoken can be very different from what we learn in a book. So someone will say, oh, in my place, we say it like this, or, oh, in my place, we say it like this, or, oh, I didn't know you could say it like this. I thought it was only like this. So it's that community aspect that makes it really, really fun and really interesting.
Yeah. And how big is the difference between the colloquial and the literal versions of Malayalam?
It can be very different. Like, yeah, so for example, there'd be a sign in the metro, and this is this big word in Malayalam, and it says Purite Kula Vari. And so Purite, is outside. Take toward. Leke or Puritekula. Ula is the adjective ending. So going toward the outside, vari, path. And that's in English, just exit, right?
Yeah.
And so whenever I break down these kind of words, people are like, oh yeah, like I never thought about that, because we just use the language and don't think too much about what each piece of the word means, and how someone from a non-agglutinative language like English can really struggle building sentences because they're trying to piece all the different ideas together.
Yeah. So my mother tongue Finnish is an agglutinative language as well. So I haven't seen the Malayalam grammar, but I remember reading something about the Tamil grammar, and yeah, it's a bit similar, the logic.
Mm-hmm.
But you, as a native English speaker, what other things in the grammar were difficult in Malayalam?
So yeah, the agglutination is definitely something that's challenging. The verb tenses in Malayalam are not always clear cut. For example, like we say in English, the present tense is to use for facts and habits. But in Malayalam, we use the future tense for a lot of those things, or we have a whole other tense for habitual action. So it's not always clear cut. Like there's not a clear equivalence in the two languages. So that's something to think about. And then we were talking earlier about spoken Malayalam examples. So like in a textbook, you might see, what are you doing? But my husband, he might say to someone, India, like it just, and spoken Malayalam swallows a lot of sounds too, or things that are aspirated in written versions are not aspirated in spoken versions. So like the word face is mukam, but people actually say mogam, so there are these things, yeah. So not everyone really aspirates, even though there's aspirated language in Malayalam. And aspiration comes from Sanskrit, whereas Malayalam is a Dravidian language. It shares the same ancestors as Tamil, but there is Sanskritic influence. So you kind of see how Malayalis, they have it, but they don't use it. And someone maybe from a Brahmin caste or a higher caste may use more aspiration in their speech because they might have studied the proper Malayalam and give it that. So
yeah, because of the agglutinative nature of Malayalam, does it have prepositions, or is it a bit like in Finnish? They don't have prepositions because they have the endings in the case endings in the nouns.
right, they use both. They have case endings plus words. So like America yilninarne, I'm from America. The yil is the locative case, and the ninarne is from. In Malayalam, if you want to talk about location, you have to use a locative case, and then there's a word. So for example, Nyan America yil arne, I'm in America. Nyan America yil ninarne, I'm from America. So it kind of works like that.
Is it
So
one
basically,
case? Is it in both? I'm in America and I'm from America.
right, when you add the yil or il to the ends of a place, you're showing the locative case. So gymalekopo, let's go to the gym. Vitalekopo, let's go home. So that il or yil is the locative case marker.
Yeah. And how do you distinguish if it's in, to, or from?
So it's the following word. So just saying il or yil will be in. And then there's an extra word. So ileke would be towards. Ilina would be from.
Oh.
So we use like that.
Oh, okay. We have 6 locative cases in Finnish.
Oh wow! So that's really precise.
It's like 2 for in, 2 for into, and 2 for from. Yeah, but yeah, we have only the case endings, and it's just that we don't have like any other words after that, like in Malayalam. And so I guess the words coming after the case endings are like postpositions.
Yes, yes, like that. So it would give more specific information about what is the relationship to this locative case.
Yeah. And does it have gender and articles?
So there's only one article in Malayalam Oru, which is or one. Other than that, there is no e or anything like that. In gender, there isn't, which is very different from Tamil. Tamil does have gender, but
Oh,
Malayalam doesn't. There are a few gendered words. For example, Midukan would be a clever boy, and Miduki would be a clever girl. But these are not. There's not a lot like that in Malayalam. And for saying you or he or she, the verb or other adjectives won't change unless it's a specifically gendered adjective.
hmm. And the pronouns he and she, like in Finnish, we have just han. It's both he and she. How is it in?
Oh, there's a lot. So in Kerala or in Malayalam, it's very much like a lot of Eastern languages where there's a lot of levels of respect. So there's actually several pronouns for he and she, depending on the level of respect you're giving that person. So
Okay.
oven and oven is very basic, and you wouldn't use it to address someone higher than you in status or a stranger or things like that. You would only use it for someone younger than you or someone that you're very close to. Like I couldn't even call my husband Oven. I would have to refer to him by his name or use
Okay.
the more polite word adeham, like this.
Yeah.
So, and I learned that the fun way when I talked about Arjun, and I'm like, oh, Oven, and they're like, no, you can't call your husband Oven. He's not just that guy, you know, he's a him at least. So, and a lot of women historically, when they would get married, they would refer to their husband as Chertan, which is older brother, because there was usually an age gap
Yeah.
historically. And so, but I'm like, I'm not calling you Jayton. First of all, I'm 8 months older than you. And second of all, it's just,
Yeah.
no, thanks, not for me.
It's a bit similar than in South Korea, isn't it? Like
Yes.
oppa, like
Yeah. And
onni.
a lot of these YouTubers really enjoy finding the connections between Tamil and Korean, like in the language. And there are some like fringe movements to think that there is like an actual linguistic connection, but that's it, but it's just it's magical thinking. Please
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
don't come for me. um, you know, that's something interesting when you study a language. You realize that there are a lot of like, I don't know what's the right word, linguistic nationalists. I don't know. We're like, you know, there's a lot of historical baggage, or there's a lot of, you know, other things that happen with the language in it. And
Yeah.
so navigating those spaces can be really difficult, especially if you're not aware of like all the other things that go on within the culture, the society around the language. But yes, as I was saying, sometimes, you know, when you're working in a community of language speakers, sometimes you have a lot of people that use language for political reasons or have like a political agenda with the language. And so navigating that can be a bit sticky. You don't see it as much in Malayalam, but you do see it in like Tamil, Hindi, Sanskrit, in these spaces, because, you know, they're trying to push a certain narrative, or they're trying to have some kind of political agenda. And that is always really interesting as an outsider, because you're like, whoa, this is much more complicated than I realized.
Yeah, that's interesting. How like how?
Well, for example, there's a lot of Tamil nationalists who will say like, civilization originated with the Tamil people, or Tamil is the oldest language, right? And people, there's this whole, because of the political climate in India, there's a lot of pushback from people in Tamil Nadu against Hindi, because there's this rightly felt fear that Hindi is overtaking certain languages, because in the north of India, you've seen Hindi push out other regional languages. So the Tamil people are very much known to like push back against that. But as a side effect of that, then you have people on the other end that are like, Tamil is the oldest language, it's the best language, it's like, you know, the cornerstone of civilization.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, and you get a lot of people with like, I mean, there are Europeans that also have this too. Like I think every region has its own, you know, groups of people on the fringe. They're like, X culture is the original culture or the original language, and everything came
Yeah.
from us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
usually it's a response to being otherwise oppressed or left on the margins, or things like that by history.
Mm, yeah. Mm, how is the Malayalam language film industry? I mean, isn't Bollywood like the Hindi, and then there's Kollywood, Nollywood, like
Yeah,
all
there's so many.
Tamil, Telugu,
Yeah,
and they are so big in India, and people probably don't realize that Bollywood is not like
right.
everything, that it's mainly Hindi.
Yeah.
So how is the Malayalam film industry?
So the Malayalam film industry is quite thriving. It's has a rich variety of movies, and something that I found more appealing about Mollywood is it tends to focus more on stories of everyday people and village people, and stories that are more relatable and in a lot of ways more realistic. I mean, of course, you're going to have these blockbuster masala hits where there's like a lot of action and, you know, one-liners, but a lot of Malayalam cinema focuses on family situations, societal situations, things that are just really easy to identify in audiences, where Bollywood kind of sells that fantasy with the singing and the dancing and all this kind of thing. Mollywood is more rooted in like the reality of the people, struggles that everyday people have. And there's a lot of actors that are in Kerala, and they also act in other films across other media houses. So
Yeah.
like Dulquer Salman, he's done a lot of work in Hindi. Other people like Parvati or Fahad Fasil work in other regional cinemas like Tamil, Canada, things like that. So it is a very, it's very much growing too, because like on OTT platforms you have a lot of original ideas coming, and it's neat because a lot of other Indians are tuning into Mollywood and they're interested in Malayalam through that media, through that soft power.
What about the Malayalam writing system? Was it hard to learn?
Yes, because it is interesting because first of all, the vowels change depending on how they're used. So the vowels by themselves look a certain way, and then when you connect them to consonants, it becomes a different shape. And also, there's a lot of conjunction letters. So once you learn the alphabet, then you have to learn how they look when they're smashed together. And then you know, there's a lot of letters that maybe aren't used as much. So then when they do pop up, you're like, what was this one again? But once you start looking at it, and it starts becoming more like, it can be intimidating at first, but I think as with any writing system, once you become used to it, once you, like for me, social media, I see it on social media, or I do something every day where, you know, I at least read it, it helps a lot. But I think it's really important to learn the alphabet because there are so many sounds that don't exist in English that when people use Manglish instead of the script, you might not know what sound they're referring to, whether it's like I said earlier, pali or parli will still be spelled P-A-L-L-I. So if
Yeah.
you're not sure of the context, or you're not sure, you know, then you might not say it correctly. Or if it's a long ah sound, they might still write it with one A. So, you know, the pronunciation won't be accurate. And then of course, the retroflex, like for example, is written with a ZH, which makes
Yeah.
no sense. And so like people are like, oh, Koshi code. I'm like, no, it's Bori code. I'm like, why is it a ZH? I'm like, I don't know. That's what they decided to do. So yeah, and I tell people in my classes, it's good to learn the script just for pronunciation. Like, you don't need to learn how to read a textbook. You don't need to learn how to read a novel, but at least be familiar enough with the script so that if you're trying to learn a new word, you're trying to learn a new phrase, you can learn the accurate pronunciation of it from the beginning, and you're not having to go back and fix it because you learned it incorrectly.
Yeah. Does Malayalam have also retroflex like T, like da and rha and
Yes.
yeah.
Retroflex. So the ones that I can name off the top of my head, we have ta, da, ha, da, because there's aspirated everything. Then you have the ends, na, and you have
Rha.
ra,
Yeah.
ra, and there's also a retroflex sh, like a
Oh,
sh, yeah,
okay.
sh. So like the name Lakshmi is with a sh, or pakshe or pakshi. So this is a sh. So
Yeah.
there's a frontal sh and a retro sh, and so that's exciting. So yeah, there is quite a bit of retroflex sounds, and when you're trying to speak it quickly, your tongue is constantly doing gymnastics from between the back and forth.
Yeah.
And my husband's like, you have to use your whole mouth when you're speaking Malayalam, and just make your mouth big so that you
Yeah.
can move everything around very easily. So yeah, it can be a bit difficult.
Do you have any tongue twisters in Malayalam that people
I
could
don't
try?
have any off the top of my head,
Hmm.
but I remember during the pandemic, I made a filter which basically challenged people to um, do the tongue twisters as it appeared over their head. But I'm not, I can't tell you any off the top of my head, but there are quite a bit. If you even just search, there's like, they love them. The Malayalis like their tongue twisters, and also like the nursery rhymes and the songs and all. There's like, yeah, there are a lot of those there that are fun for practicing. But I think just speaking the language enough is a tongue twister for me. Yesterday I was teaching a class, and there was a word that had a retroflex ra and then a frontal ra, and trying to say those sounds next to each other were really hard. So like the word to fall is viruga, and so if I want to say don't fall, I have to say vir. So like
Yeah.
like very difficult. Whereas a Malayali who's speaking it their whole life, they're like, oh, it's fine, and then it's like, oh no, it's not. So
Yeah.
it can be a challenge.
Yeah. I think just the name of the language could be a challenge for someone. Isn't the first
Mhm.
L a regular, like in English, and the
Yes,
second and the second one is retroflex? Like, is it the
yes,
Malayalam, like harla?
yes, that's right.
Malayalam.
That's exactly right. Yes, and the middle ah is a long ah, so it's Malayalam. So it's like, I'm exaggerating, but a lot of people don't realize that that second ah is
Yeah.
Malaya. Third ah is a long ah.
Yeah.
So Malayalam,
Yeah.
Malayalam.
What languages do you speak to your child, you and your husband?
Yeah, so we speak Malayalam and English. We're trying to speak as much Malayalam as possible because in the future, we do anticipate being in a place where Malayalam will be the house language and he may not hear it outside. And
Mm.
there's a lot of bilingual parenting advice that shows that if you try to have as much of the heritage language as possible in the first 5 years, it helps them with maintaining that language, because he's going to learn English in school. He's going to
Yeah.
learn English on TV. He's not going to have any shortage of
Hmm.
access to
Yeah.
English. So we need to make sure that we're speaking as much Malayalam as possible. And even though my Malayalam has mistakes and it's not perfect, at least when I say sweet things to him, or I'm calming him or singing to him, if I'm using some Malayalam, he'll have that positive association. I've met a lot of heritage language learners that are like, my parents only spoke Malayalam when they were scolding me. So like they know like all the bad words in Malayalam, but then like, like when I was in Chennai last month because I had to take the baby for his passport appointment. And as I was carrying him, I was just like saying to him, like, oh, Sundarananale, Mirukananale, you're a handsome boy, you're a smart boy.
Hmm.
And like everyone in the consulate office was just like smiling. They're like, oh, you're speaking Malayalam to your baby. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, that's really good. So it's nice. And you know, it just, my in-laws speak to the baby in Malayalam, and like my mother-in-law said, I know English fluently, but when I see him, the first words that come out of my mouth to pamper him are in Malayalam, because that's
Yeah.
the language of your heart. When you see your baby, you're going to speak with the language that is closest to your heart. And so of course, for my family, that's Malayalam. And I really hope that we can build that good base, because once they get to be school age, it's really difficult for children to navigate. I'm different. I have a different language. I don't want to be different. I want to
Yeah.
speak what my friends are speaking, and so we're hoping that just by keeping it like as natural as possible, like the house language is Malayalam, this and this, that and that, there's nothing wrong about being different. it's just a part of who you are. But you know, we can only guess how kids are going to react to that and interact
Yeah.
with that. So we just have to give him the best tools we can and hope he can use them.
Yeah. And you live in Vietnam, but now you're in Kerala.
Yeah.
So you will, are you just visiting India now, or?
Yeah, so basically I came here for my third trimester in delivery, and then at the end of the year, I'll be heading back to Vietnam with my husband. So we're both working in education. He's a school teacher, so he had to go back in August when the school year started, and then he'll be back in December for the winter holidays. So then the three of us will return to Vietnam together at that point, because, you know, having an international baby has a lot of struggles because you have to have so much paperwork, right? So like if you're an American and you give birth abroad, your child will automatically be American as long as you go to the consulate, apply the right documents and do these things. So, you know, after giving birth, I couldn't just go back to Vietnam. You know, I have to, you know, get him his passport and then get him his India documents. That's our next step. And, you know, it requires a lot of time and a lot of running around and all that stuff. So, you know, I just basically took time off work so I could just recover from giving birth and do the things we need to do to make sure he's sorted. And then when we go back to Vietnam, you know, I'll be able to work part-time or work on projects. I do a lot of educational consulting, teacher training, things like that. And thankfully, post-COVID, everyone is much more open to doing training and things online. So for education, at least, remote work is way more now than it used to be. So I'm hoping to take advantage of that so I can stay home and manage, you know, having a child under the age of 1.
Yeah, yeah. And you will be in Vietnam in the coming years, or do you know for how long, or?
I mean, Vietnam's not our forever home, but we're still like open to seeing what's happening. Eventually, I need to go back to the States because I haven't been home since 2015. That was an accident. COVID kind of made things like a bit difficult because we actually decided to go to Vietnam in 2019, and Arjun arrived in Vietnam ahead of me because he was going to do his English language teaching a credential and then find work because he was transitioning out of business and into teaching. So I said, go on ahead. I'll finish the school year in the UAE, and then I'll come over there when the school year's done. He arrives in Vietnam March of 2020. And we spend the next 8 months figuring out what the hell are we supposed to do, right? And so, yeah, so thankfully I got a job as an academic manager, and I went to Vietnam. They sponsored me. I flew over on a flight of like 25 people because Vietnam was locked down completely, longer than other countries. And so I couldn't go home, and I still haven't been able to go home. So it's like, sorry guys, like when I last saw my brother, he was graduating high school, and now he's like buying a house and you know, all these things. So it's just like, oh my gosh. So yeah, so I do plan to go on the States sometime in the future, but we really don't know when that will be. So we're just kind of, you know, enjoying the opportunities we have in Vietnam until we get to that point.
Yeah. Any final words now? I think I've asked everything I wanted.
I just think it's neat that we're covering Malayalam on this channel because, you know, a lot of people ask who's interested in this language, you know, who cares about these kinds of languages. And, you know, for people like me who are married to Malayalis or otherwise connected to Malayalis, that's an obvious thing. And then other people are like Malayalis that live abroad and maybe they're out of touch with their mother tongue because of the lack of resources. But it's also great to see people like you who are just genuinely interested and fascinated by languages. And there are a lot of people who just find Dravidian languages to be very interesting. And I'm really glad to sit and chat with you about that. And I really appreciate you inviting me to talk about this journey.
Yeah, I have to add one thing. I've got also the same reaction. Like it's a bit funny because Malayalam is such a big language. Me and my wife started last year studying Northern Sami, which is spoken by 40,000 people, and it's the biggest Sami language. In Finland, we have like in total there are 9, but in Finland we have 3, and the 2 others have, I think they have 300 or 400 native
Mhm.
speakers left.
Right.
So that's quite small compared to 40 million.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to. I'm really interested about all the languages of the world and countries and cultures. So
Mhm.
I really want to like invite people from every country and inside one country from different uh, like communities that speak different languages. So
Right.
we're huge language nerds with my
Yeah.
wife. So
That's
thank you
great.
for coming and talking about your Malayalam and overall language journey with us.
Sure thing.
And thanks for everyone who was listening to us, and see you in the next episode. Bye.